Hello, everyone. I am so excited. I've got Eleonore Pauwels from the United Nations University. She's a research fellow on emerging cyber technologies, and we're talking about just the coolest, scariest, most exciting AI applications for global development, conflict resolution. Holy cow. Wait till you hear about data poisoning. You don't want to miss this episode, so stick around.
Welcome to the Your Mark on the World show with your champion of social good, Devin D. Thorpe.
Please support the sponsors who made this episode possible, including Johnson & Johnson's Caring Crowd and GoodCrowd.School. Eleonore, welcome to the show.
Hi, Devin. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. I was so intrigued. This concept of data poisoning was completely new to me. And I imagine to many of our audience, it will be a completely new concept. Tell us about what data poisoning is. You call it the deception machine, and why we should be worried about that.
Yes, so, we face a new era of cyber threats that are actually enabled by a convergence of dual-use technologies, from artificial intelligence to cyber technologies to new forms of quantum computing. So I'm extremely interested in this world of convergences where technologies as complex systems are enabling each other, but also making each other more powerful and potentially more optimizing, but also more dangerous. So data poisoning is this idea that you could use artificial intelligence as a way to automate data manipulation inside massive data sets. So you could use algorithms to modify, manipulate the content of data sets, and you could therefore do all kinds of things. For example, recently, scientists have been able to use AI to automate cyber attacks on hospital CT scans, and they were able to corrupt the data inside those CT scans, manipulate the data, and therefore deceive even the most skilled doctors. So you can train algorithms to be able to scan CT scans very quickly and then adjust and scale fake tumors, fake lesions inside the content of CT scans. So we are facing a new form of threats where algorithms can be clever enough and efficient enough to actually manipulate without detection the content of data and all kind of strategic intelligence. So you can transpose this to data sets about refugees in refugee camps. You can transpose this to data sets about conflict mediation, the drivers of conflict. You can think about any kind of sensitive personal data that could be hacked, manipulated, and then commodified.
Yeah, it's not hard to think about having our credit score data corrupted after the was it TransUnion or one of the others that was hacked a couple of years ago, and millions upon millions of people had their credit data hacked. And if that had been a cyber attack of this data poisoning sort, we all would have ended up with messed up credit.
Yeah, so you see data poisoning, as I like to say, is kind of the nuclear weapon of the 21st century. You could imagine implications for financial stability, economic stability, even political security. And so indeed, you could see your credit score being manipulated, your data about insurance, your medical data, even your genomics data, your biometrics. They could either be stolen, corrupted, erased, manipulated in different ways. So I used to say that we live in this internet of bodies, genomes, and minds, all those extremely sensitive data that are increasingly shared, commodified, monetized, and used by different groups, corporations, sometimes governments, to create new forms of bio and social control. And we need to be aware of that.
What do we do to protect ourselves from that systemically?
Systemically, that's a really good question. I think we need some foresight. So we need a better capacity for anticipation to understand how converging technologies will create new forms of threats. So how can AI be harnessed for offensive operations, and how can it drastically amplify the threats coming from the cyber operations world? What can AI do to precision medicine and genomics and even genome editing? How can we get much better at knowing which feature inside our genomes we should manipulate and change and improve? So that's the systemic level. It's really doing foresight, doing anticipation, simulation, scenarios, speculative design, thinking together with a diversity of minds, a diversity of knowledge and life experiences to understand how this convergence is going to play out in different contexts. It's going to be different in Nigeria in 2030. It's going to differ from what could happen in Estonia at the same time or in other kind of cultural settings. So we need to be better at anticipation, at co-evolution also. So the future is not invented, it's co-evolved with a diversity of actors. How do we do this kind of thinking together and this kind of learning? And then at a more individual level, we need to absolutely optimize digital literacy, literacy about what's real and what's fake, what's false, a form of personal awareness and flourishing and empowerment.
One of the insights, you recently published a report about these topics, and one of the insights you shared was that AI can be used to improve our collective conflict resolution skills. Explain how that works.
Yeah, so I see AI as a game changer for conflict prevention because of 4 functions. So AI is a tool for data optimization and predictive intelligence first. So it's the best computation tool we have as today to be able to classify large amounts of data, and then from there, guess or produce different types of recommendations and predictions. So you could use that for conflict analysis, for complex decision making, and for conflict monitoring. Imagine that conflict mediators would have access to AI simulations that would combine different kind of unstructured complex data, such as water scarcity, epidemic outbreaks, floods, different types of climate change impacts. You could also think of different forms of economic exclusions, migration patterns, different forms of discrimination. If we could build a combinatorial matrix that could actually analyze those different types of data sets and build simulation based on that new knowledge, then we could have a better sense of, what are the deep drivers of conflict. That's one function. The second function is the fact that algorithms can detect anomalies with extreme precision. So in the future, you could use machine learning systems with facial recognition to actually do digital investigations in the context of conflict, in the context of election monitoring, any kind of outburst of violence. You could use this new form of anomaly detection that we didn't have in the past. Another game-changing function of AI is sentiment analysis, emotion analysis. So the fact that that's what we call in tech language affective computing, the fact that you can increasingly monitor, analyze, even predict emotions and behaviors as they operate in social media and in cyberspace. And so with this, you could actually monitor early signs of hate speech and how those kind of digital violences could at some point escalate into hate crimes and maybe lead to other forms of violences. So that's, for example, a topic that the UN is extremely interested in. How do we harness AI to better understand human languages and different types of dialects to be able to parse all of those data, local debates, discussions, and try to understand where there are outbursts of digital violences that could target children, vulnerable populations, different type of ethnic minorities, and how we can better understand that digital space and move from early warning to early action. So really do prevention. So those are some of the main functions Another way that you can think of AI is also automating different types of technologies. So for example, drones and 3D printing. And so you could use drones to bring vaccines or medicines in conflict zone. You could use them to monitor migration patterns very, very closely. But you could also use them for any kind of biocontrol or social control and extremely close monitoring.
Interesting. Interesting. Well, a third observation that you made, a third insight, was that you mentioned this already, the Internet of Bodies, and the potential that AI has to empower bad actors. And you gave an example of China using facial recognition. Explain more about that.
So the Internet of Bodies is this notion that we are increasingly existing as a digital avatar in cyberspace. So our own identity, our biology, our behavior, our emotions, the way we type on our keyboard, the way we react to information, how kids are super attracted by different type of videos, all of those behaviors are recorded inside networks of information. And so they define a typology of who we are, how we behave, and increasingly those networks of information driven by algorithms can predict how we will behave, what we will like, what will be a source of fear for us, what will actually, drive our shopping patterns, dating preferences, but also even our biological evolution progressively. And so it's an extremely granular, powerful, precise way of studying human beings and recording information and monetizing information about them. It's also a source of new bio and social control. So, for example, in China's social credit system, it's a way to know what you think, what you write, how you discuss with your friends, what kind of political views you have, what sexual orientation you have. How do you share all of those extremely sensitive personal data and personal behaviors? And that means that it's a new way to really police, to really control, to really shape, nudge the behaviors of different populations. It's also a way to do a very precise surveillance, almost at the level of biology and genomics data. And there has been some instances of students being, stopped on campus in different regions of China to be actually to be tested for genetic testing. And so this DNA information is recorded in a database, and it helps to find those people. It helps to also find their relatives, their family, and so progressively map who is where, who belong to specific ethnic minorities, where they move, how they migrate, and really kind of create a deep understanding of what your population is. It's almost a new tool of biopower. You remember Foucault in the 70s in France was talking about how increasingly nation states are going to regulate populations by using life sciences technologies. Increasingly, this is what's happening. The convergence of AI with genomics, with facial recognition, with drones that are all kind of automated physical technologies, all of that gives you a very precise, powerful grasp on our evolution.
Yeah, it has very implication, seems to me, because the Bush doctrine back in the early 2000s basically concluded that nation states, the United States in particular, had the right to take military action against a country that it believed would or could move against the United States in a harmful way preemptively.
Mm-hmm.
Applying that at the individual level using this kind of data would mean that a country could decide to take action to prosecute people who are likely to commit crimes before they do. How do we deal with that?
But to some extent, that's happening already in that social credit system. So you have different types of sanctions that are being implemented, from preventing people to use public transportation, to use flights, to be able to go on trains. I mean, all of that are already sanctions that are being used, being isolated from different social media, being surveilled in terms of your financial acts and operations. But increasingly, what it creates is a form of policing by the population itself. So people become afraid of doing things that could be deemed provocative, that could be deemed, original, marginal, different. And it's really insidious. It works as a covert threat to some extent. And in such a system, delation is also used as a way to, spy on your neighbors and then tell about their behaviors and kind of, reinforce that system of surveillance. At an individual level, it's really, our privacy and our human agency that's receding.
Yeah, it's some scary implications. So, Eleanor, how did you get into this area? Tell us a little bit about your background and how you arrived at the point where you're writing such interesting reports for the United Nations University.
So I spent a past life in genomics. I've been very, very interested since the beginning, in biology and different kind of biotechnologies. My father was actually working, in different types of life sciences, and he was part of some of the groups that design ethical guidelines for those new technologies. And so to some extent, I've always been interested in pursuing that legacy for a combination of technologies. And when I was working in genomics and working with different groups in Silicon Valley on the West Coast, we all had the intuition that we needed better computation tools, and that the next step, the next revolution in knowledge making would be artificial intelligence. With that form of data optimization and predictive intelligence, we would finally get at a much better understanding of our genomes, our biologies, and how we evolve, how we age, how we get sick, and why we get sick. And so that was really kind of an awakening for me to think about how those technologies work together. And I'm never interested in really looking at them as a singular phenomenon, but much more as a combinatorial matrix, and looking at converging actors and sectors, as well as risks and opportunities. And I think that's where we need to apply much better foresight. It's really anticipating how complexity and convergence is shaping our world.
Yeah. What is the most important lesson you've learned over the last several years as you've looked at this?
I would say it's exactly that one. So avoiding reductionism, embracing complexity and convergences. So let's look at combinatorial matrix of technologies as they enable each other and as they drastically change the threat landscape we face. But also think about people, populations, complex systems as evolving, always adapting, and let's learn from this diversity. So I don't think we will ever do anticipation and good foresight if we do it, between Western brains and in the same culture. We absolutely need to integrate other ways of living, of experiencing technology, of thinking about design, of making design better. And so I have I learned so much from what I call the biocitizens, or those ecosystems of young people who learn how to play with biology and how to use different technologies together. I met a young woman she was actually working on a molecular patch to help her brother and solve his disease, actually, and helping people along the way. But she was doing the research herself. Even the genomic and protein research. She's 16. She's learning tons. And I think that if we could empower that way of learning, of thinking in a diversity of experiences, we would gain so much better. We would see the future, learning from the past, and see the future with more acuity.
Eleanor, what is your superpower?
I'm kind of always leading to the next answer, I guess. But I'm as curious about the future as I am about the past. So I studied a long time ago linguistics and all languages from Sanskrit to Greek and Latin. And then I ended up in technologies. And to some extent, I think the way my brain was wired to synthesize knowledge is kind of useful now. And actually with AI, some of the linguistics is to some extent useful. But so I think, we learn so much. For example, in the UN, there is so much institutional knowledge about how conflict are created, how complex systems are developing in different regions, what we should learn about even narratives and storytelling from different cultures to know how to act in the present. So there is so much to know about the past that can inform the future, but we need also new epistemic methods to look at the future and the courage to look at it, the courage to also, try to anticipate and know that we have to act. We cannot just, stay with the status quo and wait for the next election and the next political leadership to solve everything. So the past and the future together, a form of recorded future, I think that's what I'm using most of the time.
Oh, fantastic. Well, Eleonore, I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. Before you go, would you take a minute and tell people how they can learn more about this topic, how they can access your report and connect with you personally?
Sure. So connect with me personally. My email is my last name, PAUWELS, @unu.edu. My cell phone number is 202-330-1181. And then the report is available publicly on the website of UNU CPR. So if you look for United Nations University Center for Policy Research, you will find it there.
Fantastic. Well, again, Eleonore, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us. We wish you every success in the great work that you're doing.
Thank you so much, Devin. Thank you so much for your time. It's a pleasure.
All righty. Let's do some good.
At Caring Crowd, we believe everyone has the power to make a difference. Through our crowdfunding platform for community health, we empower passionate people to drive real change. Whether you work for a nonprofit organization, volunteer, or want to get involved for the first time, you can post a campaign on Caring Crowd. Join us, because caring is where change begins.
At goodcrowd.school, 5% of what you pay to learn how to make a difference goes to nonprofits working to eradicate extreme poverty, improve global health, and reverse climate change by 2045. So when you take a course to learn how to change the world, you do change the world. Get started at goodcrowd.school today. Thanks for tuning in to the Your Mark on the World show, the Social Impact Podcast. Please subscribe via YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or Spotify.